Good evening. I'm Jeff Felipek, President of the Southwest Metro Chamber of Commerce, co-sponsor for tonight's forum. On behalf of the Chamber and the League, I'd like to welcome all of you to the legislative 47A and 47B candidate forum. We thank the candidates and the audience here for attending tonight and our online audience viewing at home.
I'm Laura Helmer, Voter Service Chair for the League of Women Voters of Eastern Carver County. The League of Women Voters does not support or oppose a political party or candidate for office. League of Women Voters Eastern Carver County has a long-standing history in our community of providing unbiased candidate and issue information that is widely used by Minnesota voters, regardless of their political beliefs. We are pleased to be partnering with the Southwest Metro Chamber of Commerce on this legislative forum.
Sponsorship of this forum is a public service providing you with an opportunity to hear the candidates discuss important issues face to face. The views expressed here tonight are those of the candidates and not those of the League of Women Voters or the Southwest Metro Chamber. Sponsorship of this forum is not an endorsement by the League or the Southwest Metro Chamber of any particular candidate.
There's never enough time to cover all of the issues. If you feel that your question was not addressed, please contact the candidate directly after the forum. And now I would like to introduce our moderator, Patty Robles, a certified moderator from League of Women Voters of Wayzata. Patty?
Thank you. We will start the candidate forum with the opening statements. Each candidate will be given 1.5 minutes for their opening statement and 1.5 minutes for their closing statement. Opening statements will be in alphabetical order beginning with the candidates for Legislative District 47A, Madalynn Gerold and Jim Nash, and then 44B, Greg Bowe and Donzel Leggett. The order of answering questions and the closing statements will be rotated based on a randomly generated grid. Candidates will have 1.5 minutes to respond to the questions. Please note our timekeepers who have a 30-second and a 15-second sign. They also have a stop sign or will call time to be sure each candidate has the full 1.5 minutes. We hope that most, if not all, the questions will be those submitted by the audience. We also have questions submitted by mail to the League of Women Voters of Eastern Carver County and to South Metro Chamber of Commerce. Let's begin with opening statements. And our first statement will be with Madalynn Gerold.
Hi there. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much to the League and to the Chamber for hosting this event tonight. And thank you to everybody who is in attendance. I feel like this is the unsung, important, and very hard part of our government, is that it's not fought necessarily in courtrooms or under big lights or cameras. It's on Monday evenings and sometimes during the Emmys that people come out to rooms like this and sit and listen to us talk. So thank you to you. I think this is great. So a little bit about me. Again, my name is Madalynn Gerold. I grew up in Laketown Township, about 8 minutes away from here. I went to elementary school about 5 minutes away from here. This is a very important, near and dear place to my heart. Professionally, I've worked with legislative action and in health and human services for most of my career. I also have experience in the private sector working as a restaurant manager. I worked most recently with individuals with developmental disabilities to help them find jobs, and that job really bridged the gap between the health and human services and the public sector and the private sector. So I learned how to really compromise between those groups and help find not necessarily a win for both sides, but a compromise. And it's that experience that I think will really help me shine, and it's what I hope to bring to this seat. So thank you again very much.
Thank you. Jim Nash.
Well, good evening, and thank you for all of you who have come out tonight. Thanks for the League and to the Chamber for putting this on. And again, thanks for you who have come out. My name is Jim Nash. I am the current state representative and have been for the last 4 years in District 47A. I've been fortunate enough to have been elected by my peers as the Assistant Majority Leader. And prior to that, I was Mayor of the City of Waconia for 4 years and City Councilman for 2. Through all of that, I have come to know that the thing that I do best is work for you, and that is what is something that absolutely drives every action I take at the Capitol. So my legislative assistant is usually pretty bored because I respond to all my emails, I return all my own phone messages. I actually don't let him do any of those things, and that annoys him. But I do that because it's very important for me to let you know that I'm not having somebody else staff out my response to your questions and your needs. I work very, very hard for our community and my family. My wife is here with me tonight. I've been married to my wife for 28 years. I have 6 kids that I have raised here in the Waconia area where I serve. Started and ran and then sold my own business there. And it is for people like me and like you that I work so hard at the Capitol. So thank you very much for putting this on, and let's have fun tonight.
Thank you. Greg Bowe.
Thank you. So I'm Greg Bowe, and I first want to say thank you to the League of Women Voters and to the Chamber for putting this event on. I think it's a great opportunity for us to get to know each other a little better, and I think that's very important. So friends of mine have been asking me, why would you want to run for a seat on the House of Representatives? Why would you want that aggravation? And I'll be honest, I don't see it as aggravation. I see it as an opportunity to serve my community. See, I had the good fortune of growing up in a family that really modeled and looked up to public service and community service. I watched my father and my grandfather serve in various county boards, city boards, school boards, and church boards. My grandmother was a reporter for our local newspaper in town for several decades. My mother was a public school teacher. So I saw public service and community service in a real positive light. So as I grew up, I wanted to emulate that behavior because I saw the positive and the good feelings and the pleasure that that gave to them. So I've had the good fortune in Chaska now of serving on the City Planning Commission, the County Planning Commission, being elected 3 times to the Chaska City Council, and being able to volunteer throughout my community for the past 20 plus years. I have really enjoyed steering and guiding our community to a positive, fruitful future, one that's good for all residents in Chaska. And so I would welcome your vote on November 6th. I'd love to be your voice in St. Paul representing your family in our state of Minnesota government. Thank you.
Thank you. Donzel Leggett.
Good evening. I want to thank the League for hosting this and the Chamber as well. I want to thank the other candidates for being up here, but mostly I want to thank all of you for coming out. This is what democracy is all about. So really, thank you for being here. I am Donzel Leggett. I've lived in the community for 15 years. My wife Tracy and I have 4 kids, raised them all, District 112 schools right here in the public school system. I played college football at Purdue University. I was a 3-time academic All-Big Ten player there. I earned both a bachelor's and master's degree at Purdue. Also have an MBA from Nova Southeastern University. I've worked in corporate America in manufacturing for 25 years, the last 22 at General Mills, where I lead currently global manufacturing excellence. I am the only vice president at General Mills to ever run for office. Now, it's a 150-year-old company. Maybe in 1880 someone did, but we don't know about that. What we know is I'm the one that's doing it now. People want to know, why am I doing this? I'm doing this because I believe that our country is going down the wrong path, and I don't want Minnesota to follow that trend. I believe we have too many politicians that are running our government. They're putting their own interests instead of people's interests. They're putting special interests instead of your interest. I'm not taking any PAC money, no lobby money, no special interest money. I will bring fiscal responsibility and values-based leadership to the Capitol, and I will make sure every single Minnesotan is represented and has a chance to prosper in this great state. Thank you.
Thank you. Our first question is going to be to Donzel Leggett. And the question is, the Minnesota Licensing and Registration System, or MNLARS, has had issues for some time and has had a faulty launch last summer. What do you think would be solutions to fixing MNLARS?
Yeah, well, first off, anytime you have a software-based project, the first thing you have to do is make sure you have the right people working on that project. You have to make sure it's funded adequately and have the right resources in place. On MNLARS, it required joint cooperation, meaning both sides of the aisle to work together to get the right people in place. It meant putting a project plan in place that would ensure that you have what's called fault testing. When you have software, if you don't put process in place to make sure that if there's a bug in the system, the bug will be found. Those things weren't done. The system wasn't provided with the appropriate funding to make sure that it would work appropriately. So what I would do is, first off, make sure we have the right people in place that have the expertise to fix the computer glitches that exist in MNLARS. I think that it also means making sure that we have funding that's available to ensure that not only do we provide the registrars the ability to refund folks in their district, but also to make sure that, again, we get the system under control and put in place. We currently have someone from the Minnesota, I think one of the generals actually is in charge right now of trying to bring some leadership to MNLARS. I think that's a good step, but I think, again, we need to have some experts brought in that understand computer programming, that understand software management, that are going to make the appropriate decisions versus having both sides of the aisle yell at each other and scream at each other and not get anything done.
Thank you. Greg Bowe.
Yes. Well, MNLARS has been a source of frustration for residents, I know, for many years now. And it's not only going to get your new license, it's going to get your new tabs. Those have all been frustrating experiences for folks. Unfortunately, a lot of times I think people think, well, it's not working, let's throw more money at it. But I'm not convinced that's the answer. Oftentimes throwing more money at it is just throwing good money after bad. So we need to look deeper and find the reasons why that's not working. Perhaps it's a different software program. I know the people in the License Bureau, they work hard and they're professionals and they take pride in what they do. But I do have a concern with throwing more money into the problem. I think we need to look a little deeper than that, and we need to find systems that work. Other states do have programs and systems that work very well, and I think it might be best if we take a look at other options that are out there that have already been proven effective, rather than starting from scratch or throwing money after this. Thank you.
Thank you. Madalynn Gerold.
So this is a question that I feel comes up a lot in forums like this and in kind of more organized settings like this, but I have been out door knocking in my district since February, and it hasn't come up once. Not a single time has this come up as a complaint or an issue for a resident of the District of 47A. So it is something that I think we are maybe spending a little bit too much time talking about, but I will also say that I agree with my previous comments here that we need to look at this carefully, and we need to come up with a compromise and a solution that works, because we're not just talking about whether or not to fund a government-run program or whether or not to try a totally different overhaul of the system. We're talking about a lot of people's jobs. And in this circumstance, we're talking about the jobs of a lot of people who live in the districts that we're trying to represent. So I think that that's the kind of thing that should take precedence in this conversation, is the people who work with this system on a daily basis are frustrated too, and they are so rarely part of the conversation. I think that bringing in those key stakeholders to this discussion will be the next step, and then other than that, we need to try to find a different way to have these discussions so that this isn't taking up so much time.
Thank you. Jim Nash.
Well, thank you for this question. I was actually hoping it would come up. As one of the only number of people in the legislature that works in IT, I got to take front row seat on this in several committees. And let's talk real money. Over the last 11 years now, we've spent over $110 million on a program that doesn't work. We've spent over $110 million on a program that doesn't work, that's impacting people. And I will disagree with Ms. Gerold. There have been a good number of people from my own district that call me, email me, have me come and visit them in their place of work for the deputy registrar, both in Waconia and here in Chaska. The dealerships have been suffering, and along with many, many of you who have emailed me and asked for my help. What we've seen is poor leadership from the very beginning, and the solution that I had for that was to, moving forward, make sure that we go out to RFP for every piece of software that we buy at the state level. We are naive to think that we can build this better than the private sector can necessarily, and that's where we have the opportunity to go to RFP. If after RFP we find out that indeed the state should build it, we should have a more transparent process so that we don't waste $110 million on something that the deputy registrars can't use, and the department itself said is only half built. So if we have a half-built system that they launched, it's hurting people in my district and yours.
Thank you. Our next question, we're going to start with Jim Nash. We cannot meet our growing statewide housing needs without significant additional resources. Will you support a dedicated source of funding for affordable housing? Why or why not?
Good question. I think that there's a better answer for that. Having served in municipal government, there are a lot of regulations that get layered onto builders who want to build affordable housing, and they have unbelievable mountains to climb just to put something that is workforce housing or affordable housing into a city like a Waconia or a Chaska or a Chanhassen or in some of the other cities that they choose to locate in. Removing some of the burdensome regulation from the state level can indeed help the cities, which is truly, this is a local control issue. This is not a state level issue. It is a local control. So city governments like a mayor or a councilman like myself or Mr. Bowe, they have the opportunity to address this issue. It is not a state issue, and creating a dedicated fund to disperse out to the various cities already happens in LGA, so they can use LGA for a lot of different things, and I do not believe that creating a dedicated fund to layer more governance on top of a municipality when they already have a heavy regulation base that they have to deal with is the wise way to go. And I say this because I work very closely with the builders associations, and their goal is to build affordable housing, but they tell me on a regular basis that there are too many regulations.
Thank you. Second would be Madalynn Gerold.
Madalynn?
I'm sorry, Madalynn.
That's all
I'm
right.
so sorry.
That's all right. So I think this is an extremely important issue that is starting to affect, I mean, we're hearing in the news, obviously, the tent camps that are in the cities. This is not an issue that's restricted to our urban settings anymore. And I think this is the kind of issue that we used to brush under the rug, especially growing up in rural Minnesota. We always thought that that was an issue that was only in the cities. We didn't know that it was happening out by where I live. So we need to take a much stronger stance on this, and we need to talk more about what affordable housing actually is, and less about, we're usually talking about big apartment complexes and the people who don't want them in their backyard. I think that that's where the conversation tends to go, especially when we're talking in the community at large. And honestly, we need to talk more about integrating the affordable options within the new development. And this is the kind of thing that I don't think we can wait and hope that a developer will deign to build something affordable, because in my experience, that's not something they're actually considering, and not something that we can sit around and wait and hope that they will be philanthropic with their development efforts. So I think that whether we have a dedicated source of funding that's dispersed throughout the state, I think that what we should do is expect a lot from our local representatives, and when we have something like funding for affordable housing, we ensure that it's custom built for the area that we're trying to develop in, because it's not going to be the same as it is in the cities. But we do need to have something out in our districts, out in 47A and 47B, and it needs to fit our needs, but it needs to happen.
Thank you. Donzel Leggett.
Yeah, so to directly answer the question, I would support additional funding. I think that it needs to be funding, though, with the state, working with the municipality, working with the county, and working with the private sector. This is a cultural and a humanities issue, but this is a business issue and an economic issue. From a cultural standpoint and from just a people standpoint, we need to make sure we have all Minnesotans have a safe place and a stable place to live. That's just common sense. But let's just look at it from an economic standpoint. For every $1.7 that's invested in affordable housing, or for every dollar that's invested, the communities get 1.7 back, and people are stable, have jobs, and able to pay back in taxes. There are companies and businesses in our community right now that simply can't hire people because there's nowhere for those people to live. We have a shortage of skilled labor in our community. We have to address that. I'll answer that in another question. But for the folks that they can recruit, these people don't have anywhere to live in Carver County. So we know we can find affordable housing, and this is coming directly from businesses right here to say we need to have affordable housing. There are cooperatives that are willing to work directly with the state and with municipalities to put forward dollars. Beacon Interfaith is one of them, a congregational group that pools their funds to try to build affordable housing. This is good for people, to get people up and going, for children, but it's good for our economy because it will bring jobs and taxpayers to our tax base here in Carver County. Common sense.
Thank you. Greg Bowe.
Thank you. So when I talk to folks at Amazon, for example, who's the big hirer in the Southwest Metro now, they say that they offer bus rides for folks to come in. So they're trying to bring workers in from all over the metro and not dealing with or worrying about affordable homes and affordable housing locally. And they still can't get enough workers here. So the labor market is very tight in the Twin Cities, and especially in the Southwest Metro. When I post jobs and look to hire people, I used to get hundreds of people applying, and now I'll get maybe 6 or 8 people applying. So the job market is just so tight, the labor market is so tight. That's part of the challenge. But I look to local communities for really a greater handle on what we're doing here. In fact, in Chaska, several of the developments that we've approved through the city council have smaller lot sizes. So you have a smaller side yard setback. That allows you to put more houses in a given area, and that makes less land prices, which drives the housing cost down. And that's worked very well in a lot of our newer neighborhoods. In addition, we have a community land trust fund, which puts money in that fund, which then buys the lot, and the person buys the home and leases that lot for a period of 30, 60, 90, 100 years. But that allows them to have a house for a lot lower price. And that's really a way through local programs to get affordable housing for residents. Last but not least, the Jonathan Association has done a wonderful job of integrating high and low income homes right next to each other, and everyone gets along very well in the Jonathan Association. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question is going to be with Greg Bowe first. What is your opinion of minimum wage legislation at the state level?
I have mixed emotions about that. You need to have livable wages. We need to provide livable wages for families, and I understand that. But what I also see is sometimes those artificial wage raises do cause a couple of things to occur. Number one, it increases the cost for the goods and the services, which impacts folks that might be on a tight income and trying to get by, and suddenly things that they need to buy cost more because of those. But in addition, I hear businesses who then will say they're going to hold off on hiring more staff because the wages have now gone up a fair amount, and that impacts their decision to hire more people. So it's really kind of a double-edged sword, and you have to be very careful to make sure that by trying to accomplish something good, you're not actually creating more problems on the other side of that coin or down the road for other people. So I really have mixed emotions on that, and I think I would need to learn more about the impacts. But from what I'm hearing from folks, residents and businesses alike, there are concerns with raising that minimum wage too quickly, too high. But we do need to make sure that we have affordable, a way to raise your family. I get that, but we have to be careful. It's not just as simple as saying, yes, let's pay more money, because there are impacts to that decision. Thank you.
Thank you. Donzel Leggett?
The answer is yes. I would support a fair and living wage. And I think, it gets back to economics. It's the right thing to do because everyone deserves a fair and living wage so that they can afford housing in this area. We live in one of the most expensive counties in the state. Just for someone to afford a 2-bedroom apartment, they have to work 2 minimum wage jobs at the current minimum wage. There's a veteran that I met, went door to door, talked to him directly. Young guy, he cannot find somewhere to live in this district, and he's been homeless at times. He's working 2 minimum wage jobs, cannot afford an apartment here. So it's the right thing to do from a human standpoint. But we just talked about the fact that we have a very tight labor market in this area. It's not like we're going to price people out of being able to find workers. I mean, the more you pay, it's supply and demand. People are going to be more focused on getting the skills they need to get into those jobs. So I don't think it's something that we have to be too careful about. I think it's something that's the right thing to do. I think it'll benefit the community. I think we'll have people who can pay higher taxes. I think we'll have folks who will be able to take care of their families better, provide for their children better. We'll be able to have more folks that are getting the type of education required for them to build the skills they need to close our skilled labor gap. Again, it's the right thing to do, and the direct answer is we need to pay a fair and living wage so every Minnesotan has the chance to prosper in this state.
Thank you. Jim Nash?
Well, thank you. I talk to business owners across my district. I talk to folks who are manufacturers in Norwood Young America or in Waconia. I talk to folks who run grocery stores, and what they tell me is that they're happy to pay a competitive wage to get a good laborer. And what they're finding is that they have people who are really unable to find jobs. I mean, the market is such a fantastic thing for people who have skills. And my perspective is I'd like to equip people who are currently in high school or about to leave high school to be in a competitive job market. I carry 2 bills, one for youth skills training, which will enable high school students to come out of high school and walk straight into a job that will pay them $19 an hour. I don't know that it's the job of government necessarily to set a prescriptive wage. I think that the business owners who can't find those laborers will put out an opportunity for them to come and, having been properly trained with these skills, that they will flourish in these. Those business owners can't find good laborers enough. Second bill I had was called VPSEO, Vocational Post-Secondary, and had it passed, it would have taught students skills in high school, and it would have provided grants to the local schools to put them on a job track that would have paid them, by the time they were out of high school for 4 years, I was told that they would make up to $60,000 a year.
Thank you. Madalynn Gerold.
So I really like that we're having this conversation. I think it's important. I think that this conversation tends to land on party lines, and we end up fighting about ideology and politics and not talking about the actual issue. The macroeconomics of it are that, yes, if we force businesses to pay more for their labor, they're going to charge consumers more for their goods. The reason this conversation is so one-dimensional, the reason that doesn't help us, is because wages have been stagnant since the 1970s in the richest country in the world. This seems like the problem that we're never discussing, and it's obviously the real problem. And with unemployment being as low as it is, there's always going to be more competition for the low-skill, lower-paying jobs. So those wages are going up. It's not because of any phantom influence in the market. That's what happens every time unemployment is low. The competition for low-wage jobs goes up. Where their wages are not growing is in the middle. And that's what matters to us, because that's where the buying power is. That's where the economy lives. If we put an influx of cash into the middle class, our entire economy benefits. We're always squabbling about whether or not somebody deserves $15 an hour based on the work they're doing. First of all, if their company that they're working for is making $150 billion, should we really be squabbling about whether or not they should be dying on the warehouse floor? We shouldn't be. And so the biggest issue for me is that what we're usually talking about is giving somebody $15 an hour and they have a family, and then our social services are paying the rest, that deficit in the payroll.
Thank you. Our next question will be with Madalynn Gerold first. We got multiple questions on education, so we're probably going to be here for a few minutes. How would you allocate to increase state funding for education?
This is the issue that comes up the most when I'm door knocking since February. This is what everybody in my district cares about, because it's directly linked to their property taxes and our community as a whole. The reason this is such a big issue is because in the year 2000, we removed the general ed property tax levy, meaning we don't have a dedicated source of funding for our public education. This is something that I'm telling people at the doors they didn't even realize was happening. The legislature removed the general ed property tax levy with a promise that they'd replace it, and now 18 years later, we're still waiting for that replacement. What that means is now our public education funding is at the whim of each legislative session, and it's always used as a bargaining chip. This is not smart policy. This is not good for our future. This is not a smart investment in Minnesota or our future of our state or our workforce. The other problems that we're discussing are not even important if we're talking about not funding our schools adequately, especially because this is a mandatory expenditure. This isn't something we can say, I choose to not have public education this year. We don't get to do that. We have kids show up at our doors, at our schools. They enroll, whether they have special ed needs or not, and we have to pay for them to be there. So we cannot simply ask homeowners to keep filling in that gap when we have this much money from the state to pay for education costs, but our costs are this big because so many students showed up that year. We need to be able to pay for that, and we need a dedicated source of funding from the legislature to replace the one that was removed in the year 2000.
Thank you. Jim Nash.
I agree, it's a very important issue. As the father of 6 who go through public schools, it is a very, very important issue. And as a sitting legislator, I have worked across the aisle. I have sought out the counsel of people in the Waconia 110 School District, the Watertown Mayor School District, Eastern Carver County School District, and have asked them for help. I have been given that help. I've talked to the superintendents and school board members, and I even pushed my own caucus to go above what the governor's recommendation of 1.5% and 1.5% was, and we pushed it to 2 and 2. These are things that I did inside my caucus, and I've spoken very strongly on them inside the legislature because I do take that responsibility very seriously. As it relates to some of the special ed needs that have been mentioned, in 2014, the all DFL controlled legislature changed the formula, and in talking to several of the school board members and the superintendents, they saw this rise on their radar in the last year and a half. We had a bill to do a task force on how to fund special ed. The governor vetoed it, and we are now doing this as Republicans on our own to make sure that we can address the issue that has been really dropped on the laps of the legislature and local school boards, and we are working to fix the special education gap that was started by the DFL in 2014.
Thank you. Donzel Leggett.
So I agree with Madalynn in that as I go around and door knock, the two issues I hear most often are healthcare and education. So education is the question today, and what I would say is that it needs to be both. I think first and foremost we do need to have secured funding. I think having education funding, something that has to be voted on and decided every legislative session, is not a smart thing. Investing in our children is the best investment we can make, so securing that funding is something I would be fighting for. I do think that there probably need to be some assessment of our current spending priorities. Now, education is the second biggest spend in the general fund, so it is a big spend already. But I think that there's a smarter way for us to take a look at all of the funding we have in the general fund, because my view is if we're making investments, the best investment we can make is in our young people. The third thing, though, I do think is important is there are a lot of programs that have been layered on our school districts and on our teachers over the years. And typically what happens, and we see it in corporate America, things get layered on, the new program comes in, people forget about it, and a new program comes. The next year another one comes. This adds administrative red tape, it adds cost, it adds labor, it adds unnecessary work. Our teachers are suffering, and our school system is paying the brunt of that. I think an assessment of all the past programs, make sure we get the ones that are most efficient, and get that funding working for our kids.
Thank you. Another education question. Oh, I'm sorry, Greg Bowe. I
all
tried
right.
to leave you out there, so sorry.
That's all right. Well, thank you. You know, education is a very important issue, and so much so because that's our future. Our children are our future, so we need to do right by them. And I think we're looking not only at grade school, high school, but post-high school as well. And when I look at post-high school in particular, I see a lot of effort going into college. But I also know by talking to people that are out there in the working world in the trades, that the trades are very, very short. You can't find plumbers, you can't find electricians, you can't find carpenters. And so that not only is a need that's not being met, that we need to persuade people that that is a very worthwhile way to make a living that actually pays a very good wage. That would also help to drive down some of the costs of housing as we look at that as well, because of the shortage of workforce. But in addition, the public school teachers that I know in my life, including family members, tell me of the challenges they have, the requirements that come down from the federal government that they're having to really fine-tune how they teach in order to make a certain grade with the tests of the school to get the funding they need. I have a college student in my family now who is racking up student loan debt, and an older child who graduated recently who is still paying on that debt, and I finished paying mine off not that long ago, having gone back to school. There is a lot of cost there, and we need to find ways to do that, and dedicated funding would help with that, certainly. Thank you.
Thank you. Another education question. We're going to start with Greg Bowe. What specific ideas do you have to lessen the widening gap in education opportunities for the students in Carver County?
I think one of my thoughts is going back to what I started out with, which is looking at the many opportunities that are out there and talking more about the skilled trades that are out there. As I say, I hear from people in the business, in the building trades and such, that they can't find enough workers. And so therefore, they're having to try to bring people in from out of state to try to bring in enough workers that they can build the houses they need, that they can build the commercial and retail buildings that they're trying to build. So it's working with the trades to reestablish those trades, the journeyman programs for electricians and plumbers and carpenters and such. Those wages starting out after a 6-month journeyman program can be $60,000, $70,000, $80,000, $90,000. And a lot of college students won't see that kind of wage for many years. Meanwhile, they're graduating with $100,000 in debt. So I think we really kind of need to take a step back and look at what we want to do in the educational system. That's going to be step number one, and that's probably the biggest step. In addition, I think we need to take a look at the teachers and the system we have here. We need to allow schools to promote teachers that are doing a good job and not have it hinge so strongly on seniority within the system, because we have a lot of young, bright teachers, very energetic, that don't have the years on the job, but they're doing a phenomenal job, and we need to reward that and promote them. Thank you.
Thank you. Donzel Leggett.
Yeah, first and foremost, we have some fantastic teachers in this whole state, and certainly here in District 112. I'm very proud of our teachers. We have a great school system. Here's some things I'll tell you that we have to address to fix the opportunity gap. And you've asked some of these questions already. First and foremost, homelessness. Children that don't have a home are not going to do well in school if they're not safe. Secondly, we have to have a fair and living wage. If a parent's got to work 2 jobs, they're not going to help their kids with homework. Number 3, we have to make sure that we're providing early childhood education. I believe that's important. The governor started some of those programs. I think we need to continue them, make them on a voluntary basis. So those are some things to address the opportunity gap. I've been talking about making trade schools free or bringing trades back into high schools at every door I knock. And I've been telling parents it's in all of our best interest to tell our kids it's okay to be a plumber. Plumbers do make good money. And sometimes kids might need to do that from the time they're 18 to 22, and then they may decide to go to a 4-year school. Not everyone wants to go to a 4-year school. I think that we can find ways to allow kids to earn more college credits in high school by rejiggering the AP program and process. There are other ways to test for whether someone captured the AP learnings than just a standardized test. That's the worst way to do it. There's other ways to do it to make sure kids can come out of high school with college credits already, 1 semester, maybe 2. That automatically is going to reduce their college debt load. But it all starts with the social programs that people think are socialism that actually provide economic growth to our community.
Thank you. Madalynn Gerold.
Thanks. So this is another question that also comes up when I'm talking to voters as well. And I think it's because the question is usually about what we're investing our money in as a community. And I think people are nervous about giving things away, especially to children. We tend to see children as a separate species. And should we invest in that species, that strange species? And every generation thinks that the children that came after them are even weirder than they were, and maybe this generation is lost and we shouldn't bother and cut our losses. But children are just adults who have not gotten big yet. And we need to start thinking about that more seriously. And I'm super sensitive to this because I feel like childcare and school is often relegated as a woman's issue. And I think that we need to pay attention to the fact that there are young men and young women in our schools, and men and women who are responsible for them. And as a community, we need to take it more seriously. We talk about going into war-torn zones, and one of the biggest problems with those zones is that children are growing up in unbelievable abject poverty, and they become dangerous. That's the kind of thing that we have to take into consideration when we think about whether or not we want to spend our money on children. It's absolutely, it is our infrastructure. It is what will make us solvent in the future, and we need to take it seriously as an investment and not see it as a frivolous or nice thing to do.
Thank you. Jim Nash.
Well, as the father of 6, I will tell you, kids can be weird. So I think all of us so far have agreed that we need to make an investment in some of these youth skills training or dual enrollment, or finding ways to get kids turned on in high school, get them dual credit both in a trade school or perhaps in a college. I've been doing that for the last number of years. Carried the youth skills training bill, carried that VPSEO bill that I talked about, voted to appropriate money for the pipeline program, and actually have seen it in work out in Norwood Young America in a CNC shop. So 2 young students who were in high school that really had no great aspirations to do really anything, they realized that they like to work with their hands. And they were encouraged to do that, and I will agree that we need to do a better job of letting people know that when you come home from the end of the day, if you need to use a nail brush, that's every bit as honorable as being a lawyer or a doctor, or as I work in cybersecurity. That's honorable work, and we need to make sure that we go out of our way to get people excited about that, because that's what built America. Now, the kids that are entering these jobs today, I work in cybersecurity. There are some very bright young people in high school today that should be put on a fast track because they will be excellent practitioners. If we can find them early, introduce them to a high-paying job, They can get dual enrollment as they leave high school. These will be very productive members of our society. I stopped before you said it.
Thank you. Madalynn Gerold.
I answered the question.
I'm so sorry.
That's all right.
Here's a new question. Big money has become an issue in campaigns. Would you support a legislative fix for Citizen United? And if you have taken PAC money for your campaign, how much have you received?
I would support legislative efforts to remove big money from campaigns. I have accepted $250 from Education Minnesota. That's the only donation I've accepted from a PAC or a special interest. I really think that this conversation is important, mostly because we tend to not really understand where this money is coming from. When we talk about the Senate races that spend millions of dollars on their campaigns, it doesn't really make sense. And you wonder, what are they spending it on? And where is it coming from? And we introduced new legislation that enforced candidates to say, I endorse this message, or I stand behind this message at the end of their advertisements on TV. And that didn't slow anybody down. And now we have advertisements coming from rogue places that you don't know who's responsible for it, or you do, but it's a faceless entity. There are so many workarounds that I like the idea of legislating this and helping protect our democracy in this way. I see it as being kind of a forever cat and mouse chase that we may never resolve. And as much as I like the idea of using legislative action to fight it, I don't think that I see the solution there. I think that we need to force our local democracy and action on the ground with grassroots campaigns like I'm running. I think that is the best solution to this problem. It costs no money to door knock, it's free. And I think that if we force that issue and force that kind of campaign, it'll reduce the issue for this kind of effort.
Thank you. Jim Nash.
So the legislature, since I've been there, has seen a bill come, I think, 3 times, maybe 2, to address the Citizens United that was passed from the Supreme Court, the decision there. The bill each time from lawyers on both sides of the aisle was clearly dictated that it was going to be unconstitutional and it would be tied up in the courts. I think that each of us will file a campaign finance report. Who we've received money from is very, very clear. It is something that when I receive a donation from a lobbyist, I tell them very bluntly, and I look them in the eye, I do appreciate your approval of what I've been doing and your willingness to help me win my race, but I may not vote for your stuff. And I have actually returned checks from folks that I didn't believe in, and I've voted against people who have sent me checks. This is not about buying an election at the state level. It's not. When you file your campaign finance report, it is way out in the open. So, if there was a bill that would not be unconstitutional, I'm sure it would make its way through by now, but under full DFL control, that never came forward. And I'm just curious as to why this gotcha question seems to come out so often. Again, our campaign finance reports are very clear, very transparent. And I think that if we're going to deal with something, put it.
Donzel Leggett.
To me, this is probably the most important question that's come up and falls in line with why we're having this gathering tonight, because this is all about the protection of democracy. There was a reason why there was something put in our early government structure to not have too much money put in our government and in our campaigns. And this decision was a disastrous decision. We all know why. So I'm going to tell you point blank, I take 0 money from PACs, 0 money from lobbyists, 0 money from special interests. I've returned all checks. There are some organizations that have endorsed me. Great. Education Minnesota, thank you. The trades, thank you. The Minnesota Nurses Association, thank you. But I've returned all those checks. I don't think that our government should be based and funded on organizations that we don't know where their money comes from, even if they're great organizations. Look, I'm a vice president of General Mills. I can tell you how to make Cheerios. I can tell you how to make yogurt. I can tell you how to get billions of dollars out of budgets. I may not know every single thing about the legislature, but this I do know. Democracy starts with making sure you put it in the people's hands, not in big money that you don't know where it's coming from. So absolutely, I will take no PAC money, no lobby money, no special interest money.
Thank you. Greg Bowe.
Thank you. Yes. You know, there is a lot of concern publicly about big money in campaigns, and I hear that a lot from folks. One of the things I was most surprised about, I've run local elections and been elected on the city council 3 times. And each election, I got a check for $25 from one person. I never asked for any money. I just would get one $25 check every time. Made me smile. I was thankful and grateful, but the point is I just did it on my own dime. But people think that there's big money in the campaigns, in the system. Truth be known, there's a lot of regulations in that book that's about this thick that tells you, you know, what you can take and what you can't. And you can't take donations from businesses and things like that directly. So there's a lot of regulations already. And as Representative Nash noted, the reporting is crystal clear as to where you take money from. One of the best things we do in Minnesota is the PCR program, the Political Contribution Refund Program. And that allows regular folks to give $50 to a candidate. And they can get their $50 back from the state of Minnesota. That is the best kept secret in the state of Minnesota. Most people are unaware of this program, and yet it allows folks who have a limited income, who don't have a lot of money, who don't have sway or don't have a big checkbook to donate to help candidates. And I would like to see that become, you know, more well-known and maybe even raise those limits slightly, because folks appreciate that opportunity. They're just not aware that it exists out there. Thank you.
Thank you. Donzel Leggett, you'll be first with this next question. What are your views on the role of the state in regulating gun control?
Well, let me first make it very clear where I stand on gun control. We have a Second Amendment. I support it. I will defend the Second Amendment. Anyone has a right to bear arms. But I do believe that there are things that we must do at the state level, and I will fight for to make sure we keep our community safe. First and foremost, I believe we need to have universal background checks, including red flag legislation. Secondly, I believe we need to have access protection legislation that's much stronger. We should not allow for guns to be in a home and not secured, and that means in a safe. 70% of the school shootings, the kid that used the gun got the gun at home. In our state, just so you know, there's more people that get killed from suicide than from murder and car crashes, and almost 80% of those are from gun. Guns are used in only 6% of suicides, but they're responsible for almost 90% of suicide fatalities. Clearly, there is a link between access and folks losing their lives due to guns. So I will fight for the Second Amendment. I will defend it. I want to make that very clear. But there's common sense things we can do, and I will fight for those too. Universal background checks, making sure we have access protection, and making sure that we ban bump stocks and things that turn guns into war machines that we don't need. This is very simple. I want to make it very clear. I support the Second Amendment, but there's common sense things we can and must do to protect our people in this state.
Thank you. Greg Bowe.
Yes. You know, everyone wants to live in a safe community. We all want to have a safe community, safe schools for our children and that sort of thing. And so I get that. But I have heard people talk about wanting to allow teachers to be armed in the school system and that sort of stuff. And boy, I tell you, that one concerns me a lot. I don't see that as a solution. One of the thoughts I have is, when you look back into the 1980s, there was an expression that we all heard, going postal. And that expression was born from a high-stress job in the U.S. Postal Service, where people who were working in the post office were starting to become known for bringing guns into the workplace and shooting people, shooting their coworkers, shooting their managers. Truth of the matter is, it's not the device that does it, it's the people. And in the case of the post office, the Postal Service, they took a look in their organization and looked deep in the organization, and they found what was the stressor, what was causing that high stress in the job. We need to ask ourselves, what's wrong with our children today? What kind of stresses are they facing that are causing these kind of issues to bring guns into school and shoot people? If we can find those problems, we can address those problems, and I think we'll have success like the Postal Service did. That's a big part of, I think, our solution, is finding what's driving that. And then last, I do have concerns about the red flag laws, because people can have accusations leveled at them and not have a chance to defend themselves, and those red flag laws will take their guns away. And time is up.
Thank you. Jim Nash.
Well, this is an important issue, and it's a timely issue. We see it a lot in the news, but here's some of the facts that don't always get talked about. In the last 20 years in the state of Minnesota, gun ownership has risen, the number of people who have a permit to carry has risen, and gun violence has decreased by 50%. That's not my study, that's not an NRA study, that was done by Pat Kessler of WCCO. Let me say that again. Gun ownership has risen, the number of people who have permits to carry has risen, gun violence has gone down 50%. I want to make sure that we point out also that it is currently a law that if you have a gun in the home, it is required to be locked up. That is an existing law. What do we need to do to address this issue? Folks have talked about red flag laws, and I think that that is an important aspect to talk about. The mental health component of gun violence is a very important one to talk about. Now, a red flag law is one where a concerned family member or neighbor can make it known to law enforcement, but if we don't have due process, if we just simply capriciously say so-and-so is crazy and we're going to take away their guns without giving them due process, then we have deprived them of their constitutional right. That is not something that I want to be a part of, and I don't think it's anything that my fellow folks up here on the dais want to be a part of, because due process is critical to something as important as a constitutional right.
Thank you. Madalynn Gerold.
I feel like this conversation usually revolves around gun rights, and I think that's important. I think the Second Amendment is important. I understand where it came from, and I have had guns in my home growing up my entire life. All of my neighbors do. It's something that my neighbors have approached me since I announced that I was running for office to ask me about, because that's something that they worry about. I have built a coalition of gun owners in my community to discuss with them what they think the solutions are. And a lot of them have come up with similar things. Yes, the locking up your gun is already a law, but it is not enforced. And then the question is, how do we enforce that law? Well, we don't want enforcers to just be breaking into people's homes to enforce that law. That's not good either. So we're still talking about it. This is an extremely complicated issue. To that point, that it is such a complicated issue, I think one of the best solutions, I agree with Mr. Bowe on this, we need to allow the CDC to investigate gun violence. The fact that that's not allowed seems like a stark issue, a huge problem. Speaking of red flags, who are they representing? Why is that a law? Why is that against the rules? And I think that we often tend to talk about gun rights as it pertains to the gun owner, but really what it sounds like to me whenever we're defending the Second Amendment is who we're actually working for is gun manufacturers. And that isn't any of us. I think that we need to focus on what our legislation is doing and who it's for. If it's for gun owners to make sure that they can protect themselves, I would obviously support that. If it's to help gun manufacturers, I wouldn't.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we have run out of time to ask more questions. So many things to talk about and so many additional questions I'm sure that the public has, and hopefully you'll be able to stick around afterwards so that they can continue to ask you your opinions and your thoughts on different things. Right now, we're going to have the candidates give their 1.5 minute closing statements to summarize their qualifications and positions. And we're going to start with Greg Bowe.
Very good. Thank you. Well, once again, thank you to the League of Women Voters and the Southwest Chamber for hosting this event tonight. Thanks for all of you for coming tonight to listen to this. It's a great chance for us to get to know each other, and we appreciate taking time out of your busy schedules. I also would like to thank my family. Before I decided that I was going to file, the first phone call I made was to my wife to make sure that that was okay, because it's a big, big time commitment. So you have to make sure you have buy-in from the family. And my wife was very supportive of that. Our children have grown and they're off on their own now, and so that gives me that opportunity to give back to my community in a different way. I love our community here, and I really enjoy serving our community as a volunteer and as an elected official locally. And I'm really excited about having an opportunity to serve in a new way as a representative on the House of Representatives. I would also like to thank Joe Hoppe. He has served Eastern Carver County very well for the past 16 years. He's done a phenomenal job of making sure we have funding in place for the road projects that are coming, for education, just making sure that Eastern Carver County gets the attention that it needs in the legislature. So I wanted to make sure that I thanked him. I have certainly had great opportunities over my years going to school, finding that the job market changed, so I had to go back to school again because jobs left overseas and mine went with it. So I went back to school for another degree. Now I have a master's in public administration. That helps me to understand government, how it works, how it should work, how it can work, and how to fix it when it doesn't. Thank you.
Thank you. Donzel Leggett.
Yes, thank you again to the Chamber and the League of Women Voters for hosting. Thank you all for coming out. I want to thank my family as well. I want to thank my wife, Tracy, because she's the one that actually pushed me to run. She said, we need leaders. Things are not going as well as they should be, and we cannot allow our state to go down that path. She said, we need to make sure that we give people a choice between career politicians and leaders. And she said, Donzel, you're someone who has a track record and people believe in you in this community. And I can tell you that there's so many people that have stepped up in our campaign. We have over 250 volunteers, and almost all of them are people who have never been engaged before. Like I said, I've never run for anything. This was not something I was intending to do. I probably put a promotion to the side to make this happen. But this is a critical time for all of us. And I think it's going to come down to something very simple. Do you want politicians who are going to keep doing the same thing, or do you want leaders? I'm going to give you direct answers. I'm going to tell you the truth. I may not be the expert on everything, but you're going to know where I stand. That's why there are former CEOs and union leaders on my campaign team. That's why there are Democrats, independents, and Republicans on my campaign team. They don't agree with me on everything, but they know that I'm someone that has the courage to stand up for what I believe in, even if that means standing up against the Democratic Party. So when it comes to a decision, decide. Do you want a politician or a leader? If you want a leader, vote for me November 6th.
Thank you. Madalynn Gerold.
Thank you again to the League, to the Chamber, to all of you. This has been a wonderful electric evening. I'll repeat, my experience really comes from public service, where it bridges with the private sector. I believe that experience working with legislative action, not only for the developmentally disabled job seekers that I served, but also for the employers who I wanted to hire my guys. I worked with them to help fight for their rights as well. They're equally important, and I think that we need to consider both sides if we're going to have compromise. That is what I bring to the table here. I have that proven experience of being able to compromise, even when there isn't a clear winner, to bring something to the table for both sides. I also feel like the country overall has become distracted by federal policies and politics, and going around to the doors, people want to know who I support for the presidency in 2020, or they want to know who I voted for in 2016. And I tell them, but then I say, that's not what we're doing here. And that's a really important takeaway. That's one of the most important things that I say when I'm door knocking, is that this is what makes us America, is that we have representatives who go door to door wearing out their shoes to find out what's important to them. That's the thing that I think is the most important to us. We do not have a monarchy. We do not have a king. We have a presiding officer. And then we have representatives that live in the same neighborhoods we live in to represent us. And that's what I want to do for the people of 47A.
Thank you. Jim Nash.
Well, thank you again to the League and the Chamber for hosting this evening. It's a good night. I appreciate seeing a full room full of folks here. Wanted to thank my wife again for coming and for supporting me as I have been working at the Capitol for the last 4 years for the folks in 47A. It's those folks that I do work for. It's those folks that I work very hard for, the business owners, the students, the mom and dad who were sitting at the kitchen table trying to figure out how do they make the checkbook last through the end of the month. It's those folks that I fought to lower taxes for, build better roads for, help out with schools. And, you know, I think that it's an important thing that doesn't always get into the news media, but I'll share a little bit of insight. We seem to see a lot of partisanship in the news media, but I'm going to share a retirement speech blurb from my friend Peggy Flanagan, who is running for lieutenant governor for the DFL. She said, you know, this legislature place makes weird friends. And she says, there's never a more strident case of a strange friend than my friendship with Jim Nash. And the whole chamber turned and they looked at me as if I was strange, but no, it was the friendship between two people who are so diametrically opposed on policy issues, but they came together to be people and to be friends, and we lift each other up. That's what I do at the Capitol for folks in 47A and the people of Minnesota every single day. I work very hard to make sure that we're helping all Minnesotans do better. Thank you.
Thank you. Again, I would like to remind you that the views expressed in this forum are those of the candidates, not those of the League of Women Voters. Sponsorship of this forum is not an endorsement of any candidate by League of Women Voters, Eastern Carver County. And now for our closing. Laura Helmer.
League of Women Voters of Eastern Carver County would like to thank you all for coming tonight and our online audience for viewing. We especially like to thank our candidates for being part of the democratic process and for being willing to serve your community. The League researches issues important to our members and to the health of our communities. If you are interested in finding out more about what we do and how you can also make a difference, please pick up a membership brochure at the registration table or visit us at lwvmn.org. Membership is open to all people age 16 and older. You can find more information about candidates and about voting at mnvotes.org and lwvmn.org. Links to all the candidate forums and additional voter information can be found on our Facebook page. Again, thank you for coming, and the most important thing, remember to vote on November 6th.